Welcome to the Passing Through podcast, a show dedicated to exploring those spaces not just within, but also between and around us. The cracks in the walls, the moments between the moments, the silence that stitches a song together. This isn't a podcast about answers or about fixing the world. It's a space for listening, for slowing down and sitting in the unknown to see what might surface in the stillness. Eat the feet of the finest fowl. A diamond is a rare and costly rock. Strip the small bed and make it again. The next time you hear it, she will appear. The wind waves an old willow near the lake. His new shoes are covered in cake. Take care not to spoil the orange cloth. Sing the sky a song when the sun is setting. Beat the sweet cream until it is stiff. The child cries from a filthy crib. Welcome back to the Passing Through podcast. If you're new here, this podcast is an ongoing exploration of the unknown, the emergent, the liminal in-between spaces, that murky gray area that makes up so much of what it means to be a living, breathing human being. It's actually hard for me to think of how to describe what this podcast is about because it isn't about any particular thing, I would say. It explores all of these things, but it isn't necessarily about any one specifically. Just like life isn't about any one thing specifically, and once we try to pin it down and paint it as though it is about one specific thing, that's where we start to get into problems, I think. That's where things become dogmatic and rigid and inflexible, and maybe too fixated on a single thing. I mean, from where I'm sitting right now on the farm that we're staying at in Poland, I'm looking out of a window at a sprawling mountainside full of snowy pines and white slopes and thin and bare branches of reddish colored trees. Nearer to me, there's a thin birch that has lost its leaves. And there's so much multiplicity, there's so much diversity. There are so many things that I can't even see, so many little creatures, maybe rabbits and foxes and badgers or deer, and the birds and soil microorganisms and the things that live under the soil, under the snow, little moles and rodents and things like that. So we don't see one thing in nature. Why would life be about one thing? Why would this podcast be about one thing? And I think I'm asking these questions because I've been practicing dissolution this season. I've been trying to let go of things and seeing what it's like to kind of dissolve the self. And that hasn't been an easy thing for me. And I want to maybe talk a little bit about that because until this point, it hadn't been something that I was in touch with or curious about or very interested in. But having done it, having exposed myself to this idea somatically, emotionally, energetically, I realized an interesting thing, which is it's hard to dissolve. It's hard to dissolve. I'll just stop there. But it is especially hard to dissolve those things about yourself that you like and cherish and you may not want to let go of. So let me give you an example here. When I first thought of dissolution, it was like, okay, I'm going to be letting go of my wants and desires and needs and sense of responsibility, identity, the body, needing to do anything. Just let go of all of that and enter a kind of void state. And I've done that kind of thing before, right? Whether through meditation or through holotropic breath work or these kind of things, even psychedelics, right? Even something as benign as marijuana, you can gain access to those kind of states. And on the surface, that sounds kind of simple. And like I said, maybe many listeners have touched at something like that before. But this time, doing it consciously, deliberately, mindfully, trying to do it as a practice, I started to realize that something like identity, to dissolve that requires you not just to dissolve the things about yourself that you find problematic or ugly or challenging, difficult. It's easy to let go of those things. Part of us wants to. But the other things, the good things, letting go of your capacity to love, to be kind, letting go of fairness, letting go of compassion, letting go of the things that you like about yourself, the things that make you feel good, maybe the things that make you feel connected to others, maybe your unique abilities, maybe you're an artist, maybe you're a musician, maybe you are very literate, you're an avid reader and you can write well, and letting go of your command of language or your knowledge of classic literature, modern literature, whatever you specialize in. Maybe that becomes frightening. And this was my experience. I felt resistance inside myself to let go of those things. And one of those things that came to my mind was this podcast. And I was thinking, what does it mean to let go of this podcast? Because this podcast for me has been a bit of an anchor for the last few years, where so much around me has been unstable and in flux and in motion and unknown. But having the ability to set aside some time and sit down and record something, just that ritual, that ceremony of entering into a space, being present, being mindful, gave me something and continues to give me something that is, as I said, anchoring. It gives me a sense of place. It gives me a sense of identity in a way. Not that I necessarily identify myself as a podcaster. We're actually at a wedding in Slovakia the other day. And towards the end of the wedding, when everybody was leaving, I had struck up some conversation with a Slovakian guy who was a little bit younger than me. And we were talking about books and we were talking about the state of the world. And it was a pretty deep conversation for such a casual encounter. So I guess it left a mark. And as I was leaving, the bride and groom had said, "Oh, you met Danny? Yeah, he has a podcast." And when I was presented as a podcaster, I felt a sense of shame or embarrassment. I wanted to hide. I felt a kind of withdrawing, of collapsing inward. So I don't mean podcaster as a sense of my identity, because I think part of me bristles up against that, but just as part of my practice, as part of this ritual of making something, putting something out there. And then I thought, okay, if I let that go, what happens? If I let go of certain associations I have with the show or of certain intentions I have for the show, then where does that put me? And when I was asking these questions, I was like, holy fuck, I don't even know what my intention is for this show. In some ways I do. In some ways it's clear. But again, going back to this plurality versus singularity, I didn't have a single intention for the show. I struggled to think of what it was. So I'm still thinking about it because it was an interesting observation to notice this. And I'm still trying to understand what I would like this to achieve, what it is exactly that I'm doing, who is even my target audience for this show. That's another interesting thing. Obviously, I could imagine that there are people who listen to this who are seekers, who are curious about certain things, who would like different perspectives or alternative ways of seeing things. And when they hear certain ideas, this can be valuable. This could be rewarding. This could be enriching. So I get that and I understand that. But then there are probably people who are already into those things, like people who like permaculture, people who like spirituality, Buddhism, literature, poetry, myth, story, these types of things, which are things that I discuss here. This could be interesting and attract some people. But then I'm thinking, yeah, sure, okay, but am I necessarily exploring those themes or topics in a novel and interesting way? And then this got me into a sort of trap in a way, because that question alone shows a sort of conditioning that we've all received, right? That what I'm doing has to be unique, special, novel, exciting, enticing. There's this pressure, there's this emphasis on doing something different. It has to be new and fresh and edgy. And if it isn't, well, then there's no real incentive to listen, of course, because why would anybody listen? Everybody has their own responsibilities and things going on and commitments and little pockets of time. Why would they spend it listening to something that doesn't have any of those appeals? And sitting and looking at it from that place is an interesting light to see it from, because I don't think that that's a healthy way to look at anything. I think that it's unrealistic to think that you can have a fresh take on anything almost. So many things are just recycled, or I don't want to say regurgitated because that gives it a somewhat negative connotation. Sometimes that's true. But there's this sense of things being assimilated and absorbed and refunneled, repackaged with maybe a new design on the bottle or the box. But mostly it's the same stuff inside. So this pressure to be new and different and unique, sometimes you can do that. We've seen certain artists throughout time introduce something that shifts the paradigm, something seminal, something influential. You see that with certain periods in art history if you've ever studied it. And so I know it's possible and it happens, but I would say that that's exceptionally rare to be someone of that caliber. And yet most of us, many of us, regardless of your field, if you're in film, maybe you want to be one of the greats. You're hoping to be up there with the Kubricks and the Tarkovskys. And maybe that's not realistic. Maybe where you're meant to be is just where you are. And that's another part of dissolution, right? Is dissolving those cultural calls to exceed, to succeed by exceeding. But to do that, in order to exceed, it's instilling a sort of competitive value system inside of yourself that you have to be better than everybody else. It's hierarchical, right? You are putting certain value judgments or instilling certain value judgments that are a little bit invisible, right? Because you're focusing on the self, you're focusing on how you are exceptional, how you can be better than everybody else, and not focusing so much on others, on what you might have to do to be better than everybody else. You know, you look at these billionaires, you look at the elites, you look at some politicians, and you have to wonder, what sort of things did you have to do to get to that position? What values did you have to compromise? Who did you have to hurt? What bridges did you have to burn? You know, what scars did your soul have to endure to get to that place? And that's kind of scary when, when I think about it. And one way to sidestep that stuff is just to be who you are and do what you enjoy doing. And that's one of the ways that I pass through this sort of self-initiation, this dissolution trap that I got snagged in, where I was like, I don't have to be or do anything. I'm just going to do what I've been doing, what I enjoy doing, which is just talking about what's on the tip of my awareness at the time. And if that's interesting for somebody, great. If it isn't, that's great too. There's no rush. There's no force here. It's all very soft. It's all very invitational. And I think we need more of that, because our world doesn't really encourage those sorts of spaces, those ways of being, those ways of thinking. And I think that's one of the things that I want to show with this show, is to just be, I guess. I don't know if I need to add another word to that. The show, I think, asks more questions than gives answers. And as I get older, I have more questions. Somehow when I was a kid, I thought that when I'd get older, things would just become clearer and clearer, and all the answers would fall into place, and I would have all of the knowledge and wisdom and mastery to know how the world works and be at peace with it. But it seems as though the opposite is true. The older I get and the more I know, and the more things I see and learn, and the more conversations I have, and the more things I read, complexity just seems to increase, and things become more gray. Things become more paradoxical, more uncertain, and not less, which is unexpected. That's not what I would think would happen, but in a way it makes sense, because you've seen more. And the more you see, the more magic you see, the more mystery you see, the more strangeness you see. Things that don't easily fit into categories. Things don't become more neat, they become more messy. You find things that transcend categoricity and description, things that can't easily be put into words. That's another thing that I was exploring, dissolving, being able to talk about something or describe it or put feelings and thoughts and emotions into words in a way that's palatable and understandable enough to be ingested, absorbed, broken down, felt, and circulated through the body, mind, and spirit of another being. This is a huge thing, right? That is not an easy thing to do, to convey your unique vibrations in a way that you can universalize it out, but also make it specific enough and tune it to your audience enough that they can feel what you're getting at. It requires skillful speech to do that. And what does it mean to let go of that? What does it mean to not articulate everything? To whisper certain words, to shout others, when to do it, to carefully choose words or just unleash a flurry of them and hope that one of them sticks, like a Van Morrison approach to speaking. I don't know. I don't know what's best. There probably isn't the best. It depends on the moment. It depends on the person. It depends on the audience. There's so many factors. It's all about relationship. And that's another one of these tent poles for this show. How everything exists in relationship. Right? That's what I hope that these conversations with guests convey. That's what I hope that these rambles of me sitting down and just emptying some thoughts convey. I guess I want to stress that the modern world, modern life, being a human being in late stage capitalism at this time, erodes certain forms of attention, certain forms of speech, certain ways of thinking. It focuses in on very specific epistemologies and ontologies that exclude many other ways of being, thinking, and knowing about the world. And one of these is about relationship. Because one of the clarion calls of modernity is about the rugged individual, the Messiah, the Savior, the hero, the king, the one. It's everywhere, right? It makes it so that you're easy to market to because you have your own unique desires, needs, interests, hobbies. You like certain colors, you like certain materials, you like certain styles, you like certain products. And so these things can proliferate and you can become part of a very insular, very specific, very targeted demographic that can be marketed to. And so that's why we see that kind of stuff. But we have to realize that that messaging exists within this container of capitalist advertising and marketing. If you strip that away, if you pull that back, would those things be true? Would it be true that you're an individual? Or is it more true that no one exists as an individual and everyone, every person, human and non-human, exists in a vast web of relationship? To me, that's much more true because I see it. I see it looking out the window in front of me right now. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't experience all of that relationship through a single body as a single subject. Of course we do. But therein, again, is the paradox, which is another heart of this show, which is that although we experience this stuff as a single entity, we ourselves are plural, right? And we're existing simultaneously as we perceive these things separately in relationship, through relationship with others. And inside of ourselves, we are plural, right? You have parts that are scared, happy, proud, shamed, wounded, vulnerable, strong. You have so many rainbows. You have kaleidoscopic rainbows upon rainbows inside of yourself. And you have things inside of you, your cells that aren't even yours, but they're in you as a container, your microbiome, let's say. So many bacteria and microorganisms. You have a mycobiome as well, which is made up of a fungal network that's inside and outside, depending on where in your body. Like when I lived in San Francisco, there was this concept of microclimates. Maybe this is something that's true in other places too, but it was really noticeable in San Francisco. Depending on which neighborhood you went into, there could be dramatic changes in temperature, in sun, and on your body, it's like this too. The biomes that exist at the base of your nose versus your armpits versus your back versus your neck versus your feet versus that murky liminal space between your anus and genitals.
Liminal. It's the all-in-one hypoallergenic hygienic wash for those hard-to-describe places. I never even knew I needed Liminal. Scientists call it the perineum, and my grandma's always called it Lucifer's Lane. Liminal has unique antibacterial and antifungal properties that kill 69.420% of all life on your body. How's that for clean? One time, my neighbor Sally used Liminal, and she said it made her fart. She said she almost died. I don't think so, Sally. I looked through the little paper booklet that comes in the box, and it said nothing about farting. It said nothing. Liminal actually prevents fart buildup. How's that for clean?
Liminal is intended for external use only. Liminal is not meant to treat or cure any disease. If used improperly, serious side effects, such as fatal flatulence syndrome, may occur. Please consult your doctor to find out if Liminal is right for you. Liminal is a trademark of Adultlos Corporation.
So there's a plurality within you and on you and around you. It's everywhere, right? It's fractal. So this idea of relationship, I think, is a core theme on this show. And I think it's important for me to bring that up because so much of the messaging we receive tells us that we are alone, that we are individuals, that you can only rely on yourself. There's a chainsaw that just scared me. One of the most anthemic bands of at least my time growing up in the grunge era was Nirvana, right? They were a seminal band. The reason I know this is because today I see teenagers wearing Nirvana t-shirts. And there's a phrase from one of Nirvana's songs, one of my favorites, all apologies. And it's repeated ad nauseum. It's repeated endlessly throughout the song. And it says, all alone is all we are. And that's what I thought Kurt Cobain was saying in that song, because it feels like what we're told. But in fact, this is not the actual lyric from that song. Fun fact here, the actual line is, all in all is all we are. Which is a very different phrase, right? And I think that phrase is much more true than all alone is all we are, because we are not alone. Nothing exists alone. If anyone is listening to this feeling alone, look around you. Even if you're sitting in a room alone, right now you're listening to this episode. So you're not alone. You're here in space with me and anyone else who's listening to the show. So you're in this distributed community of people with something in common. You're in community right now. You're in community with all the various parts of your body, all of the little cells, all of the little microorganisms and fungi, the chemicals in your blood and your endocrine system, the molecules of air that you're breathing, the food that you've eaten, the food that you're gonna eat, the conversations you've had with people, the things you've done today or yesterday, or something that happened to you maybe a long time ago that's still with you, that shapes who you are. You're in relationship with that thing. You're in community with it, whether it's positive or negative, it's still there. So we're in relationship with time and place, the place you're in, the room you're sitting in, whether it's familiar or unfamiliar, you have certain associations with it, certain connotations, certain recollections of things that may have happened there. Or if you've never been in the place, maybe you have a certain relationship to things that may happen there, of what's to come in the future, the unknown, the stuff that's unfolding. And so there's always relationship. You're in relationship to your family. That's why you're here, because two people fucked and you shot out of a nutsack into an egg and gestated in a womb for 9 months where you were fed and sustained and cared for. And then you were squeezed out. You were evicted of that cozy little perfect room that you were inside of. That's when all the trouble started. But even before those two people fucked, two people fucked, and two people fucked, and two people fucked, and two people fucked, and two people fucked, all the way back to the dawn of time, right? That's how everything was coming together through relationship, right? Two people being in relationship, and not just to themselves, to their ancestors and to their future generations. You know, this is what Mufasa was trying to tell young Simba in The Lion King. When he was talking about the circle of life, he should have just said what I said. You know, we fucked, and your grandpa and grandma fucked, and their parents fucked, and they fucked, and two people fucking all the way. This might have been a clearer way to communicate this, but this was a PG-13 movie, so I guess that explains it. But at the same time, you know what? On the topic of The Lion King, that was a PG-13 movie, but what a traumatic scene that was. And I'm sorry if this is a spoiler for anyone who's never seen The Lion King. It's a movie that came out decades ago, so if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, but it's on you. You could fast forward a minute or two while I spoil this piece if you haven't heard it. But when Scar viciously murders Mufasa and throws him off that cliff into that stampede where he falls to his death, his young child watches his father just thrown to a cliff by his uncle. This is trauma. That is an intense scene for a 13-year-old or younger child to watch. You know, I was crying. Most people who saw that were crying at that moment. It was vicious. It was diabolical to watch that motherfucker just off his brother like that, so unceremoniously, with his snide remark. What does he say? Long live the king? Like, what a prick. But even in that movie, the hyenas and the lions are in a relationship. Even though it's an adversarial relationship, they are in a relationship that affects all of the other community members of that region. So you can see interdependence, you can see interbeing. These are Buddhist concepts, the interconnected nature of all things. You can see this if you look, even in a Disney movie like The Lion King. You could see it even in your own body. You could see it in the way that time unfolds and the way that we are in a relationship with time. And so to bring this back full circle, you are never alone. You cannot be. It's not possible. Even if you're in the most remote wilderness you've ever seen, where you don't see another living soul, there's no trees, you're in a desert somewhere, you're in exile. All there is around you is sand. Sand is still alive. You know, it may not look like that to you because sand is alive on a more geologic time than a human life. It's a deeper time. The desert itself, that ecology, is alive. The clouds moving through the space, the little rodents and insects. There's stuff that's alive there. So even in the most barren wasteland, nothing exists alone. So that's, to me, a pretty refreshing idea and truth. And speaking of deep time and geologic time, I don't know if it's geologic or geological, but you get the idea. I wanted to mention that another thing this podcast touches on is this kind of pacing, this slowing down, this sitting with these ideas and not rushing to fill the space in, or not knowing exactly what I'm going to say next. Being in that emergent, slow space where possibility can emerge, I think is very important. And I would like to cultivate spaces where there's more time for that. Because when we look at the spaces that we typically inhabit, spaces modernity builds for us, or spaces modernity builds for us and through us, they're often quick fixes, this immediate gratification model. You want instant satisfaction, You want that quick dopamine rush. You want to keep pressing the button for more. And so our culture has us running around, multitasking, listening to podcasts on 2x speed while we're cooking dinner and scrolling a blog on our phones, attending weekend workshops that promise to transform our lives in a matter of 2 days, heal all of our trauma. All of this is a crazed attempt to cram more, to cram in as much time into a small pocket of space as possible, and then move on to the next thing. But that's not how nature works, right? Seasons move slowly, time moves slowly. They have their order, they have their rhythm, they have their pace. If we try to disrupt that pace, it doesn't work that way. You can't tell a pregnant woman with her child that she has to have the baby in 4 months instead of 9. It doesn't work that way. You can't put a cake in the oven that takes an hour to bake and bake it for 5 minutes and have it be done. So one of the things I want to cultivate here is just slowing things down. Not giving a fuck if things are imperfect, if things aren't fast enough, if something isn't exciting enough at the moment. Like, that's how life is. Life isn't always going to be exciting. It's not going to be firing on all cylinders. You can't just live in the constant state of exhilaration and exuberance and rush. It's a sine wave, right? It crests and peaks and goes down into a valley and moves up and down. And there are other rhythms too, but that's a pretty common one. Sometimes that rhythm can feel frenetic, can feel erratic and heavy and swingy. But there's a difference between how things feel and how things are. So exploring this, sitting with this, being okay, accepting something as it is, when it is, I think that's a really valuable skill. It's a valuable muscle to train. It's not obvious how to do it, and no one necessarily talks about it much, but that doesn't mean it isn't essential for becoming an adult. I don't know what the word is. I don't know what an adult is. I think people get older, but do they become adults? I don't know. I know a lot of childish 40-year-olds. I know some childish 70-year-olds too. Looking at the president of the United States there. So we definitely get older, but and I don't mean to just shit on Trump. That's easy to do. Everybody can be childish. I can be childish. You could be childish, I'm sure. We have those parts in us. We were children. We know what it's like. That child is still in you. If time doesn't move linearly, we subscribe to that modern notion of time moving linearly. It goes from point A to point B. But if that's not true, then you coexist with that child right now. You coexist with that old man or old woman. So there's all these different parts of you inside, and your relationship to all of them. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that a bit. I guess this episode is turning into a reflection on what are some of the things that are important to this podcast. What am I doing here? What are you doing here? I think we're figuring it out together. That's what this podcast is about. It's passing through, right? It's in the name. That's what we're all doing here. If you want to try to boil something down to a single thing, which I think is a flawed way to approach things, but it can have its utility in some cases. So I, again, try to embrace the paradox there. Can be useful. So if I had to distill things down to what is happening here, what are we doing? we're all passing through. I think that's what we're doing here. Asking some questions, not necessarily arriving at any answers, but being present for the process. And that's pretty good. If that's all we're able to do, I think I'm happy with that. And if I had to pick one last thing, let me think, what else is this podcast about? I think an important aspect of it is, and I'm not sure if it's been there the whole time. Maybe. I think so. Maybe in different ways. But something that's becoming more important to me lately is this idea of re-enchantment. Restoring that sense of wonder and awe and magic and mystery that is just suffuse, right? It is around us everywhere if we're willing to look at it and recognize it, right? We are in relationship to mystery and wonder and magic because we don't actually know what's going to happen in the next second. Right? I didn't know that chainsaw was going to be going off in the background. I didn't know that the adorable cat that lives in this space was going to come up and prowl about and make sounds in the background. I don't know. None of us know what's going to happen. And that's magical and that's mysterious. And that keeps things beautiful and interesting and novel. So we don't have to be exceptional. We don't have to be anything except open to what is coming to us from the future. And even if you're not open to what's coming from the future, it's going to come anyway. So it's a good practice to start to be open. And I think that's one thing that I got better at after living in a van for these past 2 years, is just rolling with the punches. Can help rolling when you live in a van, I guess. The wheels are always rolling you somewhere. And not being too fixated on schedules or not being too stuck on a place or a plan has made me more resilient, has made me more relaxed about certain things. So yeah, I wonder what the best way to share those little insights is in a way that isn't preachy or teachy. Because I don't mean to say that I have the answers and I have it all figured out, because I guarantee you I do not. But maybe there's a way. Maybe through storytelling, I think it's something that I also want to get back to. That's an important part of this podcast. It's been an important tradition and part of being a human being for a very, 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 very long time. So storytelling, I think, is a underutilized tool that we have that has been kind of co-opted by modernist structures, namely entertainment, Avengers movies, superhero movies, addictive but empty, like potato chip style series. It's not to say that there isn't good art that makes you think and is provocative and beautiful and re-enchants you and restores that sense of magic and wonder about the world. But I think a lot of what we see in that ecosystem isn't so nutritious. And I'm echoing some sentiments from the previous episode here, but I guess that's okay. So yeah, these are the things that are just swirling around right now. And I wonder if I have a funny story that I could tell. I don't necessarily have a funny story, but I have a story of something that is on my mind. It's like a sticky memory. Like when you step in gum and it's just on the bottom of your shoe and you feel it with every step and you're trying to like wipe it off, but it's sticking and you can't get it and you need to find a stick somewhere to put it on your shoe and just peel it off, but you can't find one. I guess the same is true when you get shit on your shoe, but it's worse. I don't want to give you that image. Unfortunately, I did. So, so I apologize for that. But um, yeah, we were driving. I don't know where we were coming from. I think we had a long day on the farm, and before we went to this wedding in Slovakia, we stopped off at my partner Asha's brother's place in a nearby city. It's about 2 hours from here. And we were staying with them for the night. We had some errands to run before going there. We had to stop at storage and pick up a pair of dress shoes that I had. I had to go run a few other errands. Asha had to go to an art store. So we had a bunch of things to do, and we were supposed to see a movie with her brother. And I was tired from driving. I was up early feeding the chickens, and I didn't get a good night's sleep. There was a mouse running around in the house, which I have a second story coming right after this that I'll end with. So remind me about the mouse. Anyway, we get to the city, and I'm trying to park our large Volkswagen Transporter, which I haven't driven or parked in a long time because we've just been out here in the mountains where I can park anywhere. But I had to do some parallel parking in the van, which is normally not such a problem. But at this point, I was fatigued, and there was some commotion in the street as I arrived there. The way that people had parked, in Poland, it's a free-for-all for parking. People park on the fucking sidewalk. People park everywhere. Like, it looks illegal the way that people are parked in Poland, but this is just how it is. And so the way that people were parked in this particular place, they were parked in the street. You know how sometimes near like a little island or a little, and I mean like a pedestrian island. I don't mean an actual island in the middle of the city, but a little footpath will kind of come out to a V, and there'll be a border there. So it kind of forks the road, and the traffic goes left or right. So in this place, people were parked off of that V. Like someone had parked in that little V space, and someone had parked beside it. And so it really crowded the already narrow lane of traffic. And so the way that I had to make the turn, I couldn't quite get in to the space because I would have scraped up against the car with like the tail side of the van. So I had to reverse, and this was causing traffic. I was stressed. I didn't like the situation. I was cursing. I was using all kind of obscenities and vulgarities, and I had completely lost my composure. And finally, I had a moment to park, and there was a woman who was impatiently waiting behind me, beeping, throwing her hands up in the air, wondering what I'm trying to do, as though she couldn't possibly fathom what I might be trying to do in that space. And so I start to park, and I kind of cut it wrong in my hurried attempt to get into the space. So I had to correct it. And now I was trying to compensate for how long it was taking me and the mounting traffic behind me. And so a little too quickly, I reversed and hit the bumper of the car behind me. Harder than I would have liked to, but not in a way that would have done any considerable damage to the car. So I hit the car, and I pull into the front, I pull in the back again, and I'm out of the way. The woman takes a while to pass by me. She's looking at me, judging me, angry at the whole scene. And, we park, and we're preparing to take our stuff out of the car. And in the midst of this, suddenly, as I'm getting my backpack and my shoes and clothes out of the car, I hear some kind of argument erupt with Asha and some woman on the street. And I pop my head out of the van, and I realize that the woman on the street is the same woman who was in the car giving me a problem before. So I don't know what they're saying because they're speaking in Polish, but I can surmise that the woman is upset. Maybe it's her car. And so I ask what's going on, and Asha says, oh yeah, she's upset that we hit the car. And I'm like, is it her car? And she said, no. I said, oh, it's not her car. So and Asha's saying, yeah, she said she's going to call the police. And I said, call the police for bumping a bumper when I was driving? And I get out of the car and I look to see if there's any damage there. And there is the smallest dent I have ever seen on another vehicle. You would have needed a microscope. You would have had to have pulled the license plate off and gotten out a microscope to look at this micro dent that was not even on the car, but was on the license plate of the vehicle behind me. And so I saw this woman, and she was incredulous. She was in a rage. She was chastising us. She was saying it's inelegant what we're doing. It's wrong what we did. She's calling the police. She's had her car damaged. She's tired of this. She hates people like us. Creating this elaborate story, just the most uncharitable narrative about us that you could imagine. And Asha had lost her patience and basically told her to fuck off because the woman was just completely unreasonable. Asha was telling her, yeah, I understand. You're right. We can leave a note on the thing. And the woman's like, you're going to leave a note now. And she's screaming at her. And Asha's like, I don't have paper and a pen. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that. I'm calling the police. She pulled out her phone to call the police. And Asha had just gotten fed up with her. I didn't really have any interaction with her because she didn't speak English. But I just watched the scene and I couldn't believe how incredulous this woman had become. I couldn't believe that she thought it was reasonable to approach someone like this as though she had never in her life hit the bumper of another car when parking. Like, to me, this is a fairly common thing, right? I remember growing up in New York, the fenders and bumpers of all the cars were scratched, dented, scraped, duct taped. Like, it was a given that living in a city, you're gonna get bumps on your bumpers. Like, it's called a fucking bumper, it's in the name. So in New York, even people would buy these like rubber little things that would hang over your bumper so that when you did inevitably get somebody that would crunch into you or scrape you, it would minimize the damage and the impact. So if those were marketable accessories for a car, that should speak to how common of an occurrence this is. So yeah, the whole thing was pretty ridiculous, and I felt anger in myself. I saw how contagious anger is, and how Asha is such a calm person. She's meditating all the time. She's very hard to rile up, and to see her just lose her patience with this woman, my patience was already gone. But yeah, to just see how contagious anger is and how important it is to slow down and stop and try to be reasonable. And if someone isn't reasonable in that moment, to just accept that and maybe disengage, which is kind of what we did, but I think we didn't do it in the most elegant way we could have. And that's just another point, is that even knowing what the mature, wise, adult way to navigate a conversation is, or an interaction is, we can't always do that. We're going to be imperfect. We're going to fail. We're going to mess up sometimes, and that's okay. Have forgiveness for yourself. So yeah, that was a funny little altercation we had the other day, but I didn't forget about the mouse. I wanted to talk about what happened with that mouse that was preventing me from getting a good night's sleep. So last night, after we got back from a horrendous blizzard in Slovakia, where the car got stuck, we even got in a little accident. Speaking of bumpers, again, this time it wasn't me, but we were driving on the snow and the ice, and a car stopped short ahead of us when we were merging onto a highway. We don't know why, because there were no cars coming, but somehow they stopped, and we also stopped. But by the time we stopped, the car kept moving forward on the snow and ice, and we rammed into the back of them a little bit. Not a major accident, but enough to have the people get out of the car. Everybody stops and looks, and we saw that there was literally no damage. There was a micro dent. I will admit that there was a small micro dent on their car from our car. Nothing happened to ours. And I was so happy that it wasn't this woman. And it showed me the duality of man, where in this case there was a visible dent that was on the bumper of the car, but it was so minor. It was like, this is what happens to bumpers of cars, right? And these people understood this, and they were probably happy that no one was hurt. Then they had somewhere to go. It was snowing. We're all standing outside in a blizzard. And they understand that these things happen. You slide on ice. They did stop short. And everything was okay. And we went on our way. So after this long ride back from Slovakia, we get in and we greet the cat. And we're hanging out. And the cat goes outside because this is a cat that's an indoor-outdoor cat, which is kind of amazing because the cat doesn't use a litter box. It just goes outside. So it's super convenient. And as I'm sitting there, we start to put on a movie. We watched Frankenstein by Guillermo del Toro, which was pretty good. I could maybe talk more about that in the next episode, but this story isn't about Frankenstein. The story is about the mouse. As I'm standing there feeding the fire, looking at the screen, I see something run across the floor very slowly, not even scurry across the floor, just saunter across the floor. You know, it was like on the catwalk, which I guess is a foreboding, foreshadowing word to use in this story. But the cat wasn't in the room. The cat was outside, as I mentioned. But this mouse is just sauntering along, and I couldn't believe it. I looked down and I said, "Oh, wow, you are just out here in the open. You have no shame. You don't care. I could grab you up. I could put you in a cup. Wow, you must be desperate or confused or sick or old, or I don't know what's happening." But I just watched the mouse and I was thinking maybe I should trap it and put it outside because it's going to keep me up at night. But then I thought, even if I do put it outside, it's a mouse. It's going to find its way back in the home like it did in the first place. So does that even achieve anything? It's going to come right back in. So I abandoned that project and just mused about the mouse and thought that it was funny that it is just walking around the house like it owns the place. After we had left for a couple of days, I guess it thought that it did. It didn't need to hide in the walls anymore. And so I thought the mouse was gone. It went on its way. I didn't see it or hear it anymore. And then I heard a meowing at the window. So I opened the window and I let the cat in. And we're all watching the movie, hanging out, until suddenly I see the cat's ears perk up. I didn't hear anything, but it did. And I thought, uh-oh, I hope that mouse realizes through pheromones or whatever senses it has in its body that there is a predator who is very curious to meet it now. So it best not go out with the boldness that it did before. Unfortunately, it did. And I saw the cat get giddy with glee and leap up off the cushion that it was on the chair, and pounce on this mouse. I heard it squeak and I felt so bad. And I wondered what I should do. Should I try to save this mouse? It had already been punctured. It was in the cat's jaws. The cat was meowing like, "Look what I found. Look at this treat." And I had this dilemma of, do I try to save the mouse? Like, how can I even save the mouse? I'm going to pull it out of the teeth of the cat and do what? Put it outside? It's just going to come back in. It's wounded now. It's probably just going to bleed out and rot somewhere, a slow, agonizing death in the cold. I can't leave it in here because the cat is just going to torment it. So I didn't know what to do. And I guess I just figured I'll let nature run its course. What can I do at this point? And we just watched the movie, which I had conflicting feelings about. But on the other hand, I thought the mouse was dead already. I looked, I didn't see it moving. So the cat, as they do, played with it like a toy, kicking it around like a hockey puck all around the room. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take it away from the cat and dispose of it now. But then I had the thought, this weird paradoxical thought, that if I was the mouse, I'm dead now. The cat bit me, crushed something, I'm dead. I don't care what happens to my body now. Like, let it be useful, right? Let the cat play. I can have a whole new life. I exist now as a toy. And I felt it would be rude to deny the mouse body this second life. And all of this happened, this wasn't like a 10-minute ordeal. The whole thing probably transpired in a matter of minutes. But the next time I looked at the cat, we heard crunching and we looked. The cat bit the mouse in half and then ate it like a beast from some kind of horror movie. So, as you can imagine, last night I slept like I was dead. I got my beauty sleep finally, because that mouse has been here that mouse has been here since we've been here. So I don't know how it survived so long. I guess it knew to hide within the walls. And then it just abandoned all care and caution. So before I end this ramble, I just want to say thank you for passing through today. If you're still here, if you're still listening at this point, you are and have been part of this conversation. And as I said, I know you could be directing your energy and attention anywhere, but you chose to spend it here. So thank you for accompanying me on this journey into the unknown. And if this podcast is something that you enjoy, if it's something that you find yourself returning to, please subscribe and share it with your friends. If they don't want to subscribe, that's okay. You can blackmail them into subscribing if you have to. Maybe you make them even get a passing through tattoo. Do it together if you want. I'm kidding. Don't do that. Definitely don't blackmail anyone. But I do sincerely appreciate your support. Thank you, and I will talk to you next time.
Hello, it's me, Marty the Mouse, and I'm coming to you from the great beyond. In his excitement, as he seduced you with an elaborate story of my demise, he omitted one crucial piece of information in this episode, which is that you must be good to one another. To all of your brothers and sisters on this planet, be they human, mouse, or cat. So, I'm here to remind you from the great beyond. Be good to one another.